Nobody warned him. That was the first mistake. Hong Kong, 1971. 3,000 people packed into a building meant for half that number. The air was thick, cigarette smoke, sweat, something electric that had no name. People weren't talking the way crowds normally talk before a fight. They were whispering, the kind of whispering that spreads through a room when everyone knows something is wrong, but nobody wants to say it out loud, because standing in that ring, on the far side of the canvas, was André René Roussimoff, 7 feet 4 inches tall, 520 pounds, a man so large that the ring itself looked smaller with him in it, a man whose footsteps you felt before you heard them, a man who had stepped into hundreds of rings across 4 continents and had never, not once, been seriously threatened by anything standing across from him. The wrestling world had a name for him, the 8th wonder of the world. Not a nickname, a warning. He was laughing when he walked in, not a polite laugh, not a nervous laugh, the deep, chest-shaking, completely unguarded laugh of a man who has just been told the funniest joke of his life, and the joke was the name of his opponent tonight. His corner man had told him 30 minutes earlier, standing in the back corridor, wrapping his hands. "You know who you're fighting?" André had shrugged, those enormous shoulders rising and falling like mountains shifting. "Tell me." Bruce Lee. 1 second of silence, then that laugh, filling the entire corridor, bouncing off the walls. "The movie man," André said, and laughed again. His corner men had exchanged a look, the kind of look that says everything without saying anything at all. But André was already moving, already walking toward that entrance, already filling every space he entered, the way only he could fill a space. The roar when he appeared was physical, not a sound, a force. 3,000 people responding to something ancient, something written into human DNA long before cities existed. Something enormous is here. Pay attention, be careful. André climbed into the ring, ducked under the top rope, the rope that every other man on earth stepped over, and stood at the center of the canvas, looked around slowly, the way a man looks around a room that already belongs to him. Then he saw him, already there, already waiting, standing on the opposite side of the ring in plain black shorts, shirtless, barefoot, completely still. André looked at him for a long moment, the way you look at something when you're searching for the danger in it and cannot find any. He turned to his corner, smiled, raised one enormous hand, and placed it on top of Bruce Lee's head, gently, the way you place your hand on a child's head. His palm covered Bruce Lee's entire skull. His fingers reached past both ears. The crowd saw it, and 3,000 people started laughing at the same time. André looked out at them, his whole body shaking with his own laughter, leaned toward his corner man and said it loud enough for the front rows to hear, said the 4 words that witnesses would repeat for the next 50 years. "I don't even need 2 hands." The crowd heard it, laughed harder. And Bruce Lee did not move, did not look up, did not look at the crowd, did not react, not even slightly. He stood there under that enormous hand in the middle of that laughing arena with an expression that was completely unreadable, completely still, like water before a storm. Nobody in that building understood what that stillness meant. Not the crowd, not the corner men, not André. But 11 seconds after the bell rang, every single person in that arena would understand it perfectly. The referee moved to the center. The timekeeper raised his hand toward the bell. André was still laughing. The crowd was still laughing. And Bruce Lee, slowly, looked up at that massive hand resting on his head, studied it for exactly 1 second. Then something changed in his eyes, something quiet, something final. He looked back forward, and the bell rang. But to understand what happened in those 11 seconds, you first need to understand who Bruce Lee actually was, because the man standing in that ring, calm, barefoot, 135 pounds, was not born that way. He was built, piece by piece, year by year, loss by loss, starting 15 years earlier in a city on the other side of the world, when a 13-year-old boy walked up a flight of stairs and into a rooftop training hall and asked a question that nobody in that room had ever thought to ask before. You need to understand something first. Bruce Lee was not born dangerous, he was built dangerous, piece by piece, year by year, in ways that most people never see, because the work that produces greatness almost never happens in public. San Francisco, 1956. A 13-year-old kid walked into a rooftop training hall in the middle of Chinatown. He didn't walk in like a warrior, he walked in like a problem, mouth never stopping, eyes missing nothing, chip on his shoulder the size of the Pacific Ocean. The older students looked at him and saw nothing unusual, just another kid from the streets trying to look like something he wasn't. But the Sifu looked at him differently. He saw something underneath all that noise, something raw, something restless, something that, if it was ever properly directed, could become genuinely dangerous. From day one, Bruce Lee was different, not because it came easily to him, because of the way he absorbed it. Most students learned a technique and repeated it. Bruce Lee learned a technique and immediately took it apart. Why does this work? When does it fail? What happens against someone twice my size? His Sifu had trained hundreds of students over 30 years. He had never been asked questions like these. Not from a 13-year-old, not from anyone. The other students found him exhausting. His questions never stopped. His energy never dropped. Long after training ended, when everyone else had gone home, Bruce Lee was still there. Alone, moving, repeating, questioning, dismantling every technique he had learned that day, and rebuilding it from the ground up. His mother would find him at 2 a.m, standing in the hallway of their apartment, throwing punches at the wall, not angry punches, precise punches, measured, controlled, each one slightly different from the last, each one an experiment. Bruce, go to sleep. 5 more minutes. It was never 5 minutes, but here is what most people never talk about. Bruce Lee lost. A lot. Street fights where he came home bleeding. Sparring sessions where bigger students put him on the floor repeatedly. Moments where everything he thought he knew got completely dismantled by someone simply stronger. This is where most people quit. This is where most people decide that the gap between who they are and who they want to be is simply too wide to cross. Bruce Lee did the opposite. Every loss became data. Every beating became information. Every moment of humiliation became fuel, stored carefully, to be used later. He started keeping notebooks, pages and pages of handwritten notes, observations about his own body, weaknesses he found in traditional martial arts, new combinations nobody had tried. He wasn't just training his body, he was engineering himself, building himself the way an architect builds a bridge, with precision, with purpose, with zero tolerance for anything that didn't work. By 17, something had shifted. The skinny kid with the attitude was still there, but something had been added underneath him. Something that the older students, the ones who used to put him on the floor, started being careful around. Not because he had gotten bigger. He was still lean, still not physically imposing, but there was something in the way he moved now, something in the way he looked at you, a cold, quiet certainty that had no interest in performing itself. It simply existed. One afternoon, an older student made the mistake of dismissing him. "You're too light. This is a waste of my time." The words had barely left his mouth before he found himself on the floor. He hadn't seen the movement. Nobody in the room had seen the movement. 1 second, Bruce Lee was standing across from him. The next second, floor. The older student sat up slowly, said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The Sifu pulled Bruce Lee aside after class, looked at him for a long moment, then said something Bruce Lee would carry for the rest of his life. "You are not learning martial arts anymore," Bruce Lee frowned. "Then what am I doing?" The Sifu was quiet for a moment. "You are becoming martial arts." That process, that years-long, obsessive, relentless transformation, is exactly what was standing in that Hong Kong ring in 1971. Not a movie star, not a celebrity, a weapon, 15 years in the making, fully loaded, pointed directly at 7 feet 4 inches of the most physically dominant man alive. And André the Giant, still smiling on the other side of that ring, had absolutely no idea. 15 years of building, every loss, every notebook, every 2 a.m. hallway, all of it had been leading to one ring, one arena, one giant, 11 seconds, Hong Kong, 1971. The bell had just rung. The bell rang, and everything changed, not slowly, not gradually. In one single instant, the entire atmosphere of that arena shifted, the way weather shifts, right before something serious arrives. André came forward immediately. Of course he did. Forward was the only direction André had ever needed. Forward meant pressure. Forward meant dominance. Forward meant the conversation was already over, before it had properly begun. He had ended careers moving forward. He had ended entire reputations moving forward. 3 steps across that canvas, and whatever was standing on the other side simply stopped being a problem. He crossed the ring in 4 steps, 4 massive, thundering steps that made the canvas shake, his right hand already loading, a punch that had put men unconscious standing up, a punch carrying the full committed weight of 520 pounds behind it. It came hard. It came fast. Faster than anything that size had any right to move. It found nothing. Not because Bruce Lee ran. Not because Bruce Lee jumped back. He moved 4 inches to the left. 4 inches. That was all. The punch passed his right ear, close enough that the displaced air moved his hair. André's entire committed weight, all 520 pounds of it, drove through empty space. The arena made a sound, not a cheer, not a gasp, something in between, the sound 3,000 people make when they simultaneously realize that what they thought they were watching is not what they are actually watching. André reset instantly. Professionals always do. One miss meant nothing. He had missed before. He reset and came forward again. Same pressure, same dominance, same absolute certainty that this would work, because it had always worked. Left hand to measure the distance, right hand to finish it. Bruce Lee was already somewhere else, not backward, not sideways, gone, occupying a position that made no logical sense, slightly inside, slightly to the right, in the exact space where André's committed momentum had absolutely nothing left to give. And in that half second, that tiny window that existed between André's full commitment and the arrival of his fist at its target, Bruce Lee hit him. Not a big punch, not a wide, dramatic, crowd-pleasing punch. A short, compact, devastatingly direct strike delivered from 4 inches away that landed on the exact point of André's jaw that Bruce Lee had identified from across the ring before the opening bell had even rung. André's head moved, just slightly, but enough. The ringside seats saw it first, a ripple through that massive jaw, a micro-movement that had no business existing, on a face attached to 520 pounds. André felt it, and something happened in his expression that had never happened in 5 years of professional wrestling. The laugh disappeared, not because he was hurt, not yet, but because something had just occurred that his entire career had not prepared him for. Something had gotten through. Something that weighed 135 pounds had just made 520 pounds take a single step backward. The crowd noise died, not completely, but enough to notice. That electric whispering from before the fight returned. Louder now, more confused. André's cornermen were on their feet, not cheering, watching, with the focused, silent attention of men who had just seen something they needed to understand immediately. André looked at Bruce Lee, really looked, for the first time since this fight began, not with amusement, not with the easy confidence of a man who already knows how this ends, with something else, something he hadn't felt in years, something his body recognized, before his mind caught up with it. Bruce Lee looked back, same expression as before the bell, same stillness, same complete unreadable calm, like nothing had happened, like this was simply Tuesday, and that expression, that absolute undisturbed calm, was more unsettling than any punch, because André had faced dangerous men before, fast men, technical men, desperate, wild, unpredictable men. He knew how to read all of them. He knew what danger looked like on a human face, but he had never faced a man who looked at him like this, like he was not a giant, like he was not the eighth wonder of the world, like he was simply a problem that had already been solved. 40 seconds had passed since the bell. André had thrown his two most powerful weapons. Both had found nothing, and now there was something on his jaw that had no right to be there. He made a decision. The decision fighters make when the script stops working, when the plan breaks down, when comfortable certainty starts developing cracks. He decided to stop being strategic and start being what he truly was, a giant, raw, unstoppable, consuming, the kind of force that doesn't need precision, the kind that simply arrives. He came forward with everything, no setup, no measurement, just the full unleashed weight of the most physically imposing man on the planet. The crowd rose, because this they understood. This was the natural order being restored. What they didn't understand was that Bruce Lee had been waiting for exactly this moment, because a thinking opponent is dangerous, but an opponent who has abandoned thought, who is running purely on power and instinct, is not dangerous at all. Not to someone like Bruce Lee. To someone like Bruce Lee, that opponent is simply open, and this is where the story becomes something that even scientists struggle to explain, because what Bruce Lee did next, in real time, was not supposed to be humanly possible. There is a speed that exists beyond what the human eye can follow. Not movie speed, not exaggerated speed, real speed, the kind that doesn't look fast, because by the time your brain registers the movement, it is already completely finished. Bruce Lee operated at that speed, not occasionally, not when conditions were perfect, every single time. Researchers who later studied film footage of Bruce Lee had to slow recordings down to 1/6 of normal speed, just to see what he was actually doing. At regular speed, the movement was invisible. At 1/6 speed, it was architecture, pure geometric, devastating architecture. Every angle calculated, every point of contact chosen with surgical precision. Not talent, not instinct, engineering. And inside that Hong Kong ring, the engineering was running at full capacity. André came forward with everything, both hands moving, his enormous frame carrying 520 pounds of fully committed, unstoppable momentum. The kind of momentum that had ended every single problem he had ever faced in a ring. Bruce Lee did something nobody expected, something that made the front rows physically grab the person sitting next to them. He moved forward, into it, toward 520 pounds of incoming force, not reckless, not desperate, calculated. He had already identified, in the fraction of a second available, that forward was the only direction that gave him exactly what he needed. They met at the center of the ring. The sound reached the back row. But it was André who came off that collision stumbling. The physics made no sense. 135 pounds had redirected 520 pounds using nothing but timing and a precise understanding of force that most people spend their entire lives never developing. Bruce Lee hadn't absorbed that collision. He had used it, redirected it, the way water moves around a stone, not by stopping the force, but by refusing to be where the force expected to land. André hit the ropes, grabbed them, turned back toward the center of the ring, and Bruce Lee was already there, waiting, breathing normally, like he had simply taken a short walk. André looked at him. Something fundamental was shifting. Somewhere beneath the surface of this fight, somewhere beneath the size and the power and everything that had always been enough. He came again, lower this time, trying to close the distance completely, trying to wrap those enormous arms around Bruce Lee, because if he could establish that grip, the size difference would end this immediately. It was the right adjustment, the logical adjustment. Bruce Lee saw it before the decision had fully formed in André's own mind. He read it in the shoulder drop, in the slight forward lean of the hips, in the way André's eyes shifted, from Bruce Lee's hands to Bruce Lee's center. A fighter going for a hold always looks at the center first. Always. Bruce Lee had catalogued 10,000 moments like this. 10,000 microsignals that revealed intention, a full second before intention became action. He didn't retreat, didn't circle away. He stepped inside, into the space between André's reaching arms, the one place on Earth where 520 pounds had no leverage, no power, no advantage. His left hand found André's right elbow, not grabbing, redirecting, a movement so precise, so perfectly timed that André's own momentum became the problem. André stumbled past him, one massive hand swiping at air, his enormous frame twisting, trying to locate something that was no longer where it had been. 3 strikes came in the gap, so fast they registered as one sound. Left rib cage, solar plexus, right side of the jaw. André's legs bent, not collapsed, bent. The structural response of a body receiving information it had never received before. The crowd was completely silent, not the silence of boredom, the silence of witnessing something that the human brain struggles to process. Something sitting right on the edge between what you know is possible and what you are absolutely certain was not. His corner man, a veteran of 30 years in combat sports, a man who had genuinely seen everything, turned to the man beside him, said 4 words very quietly. "What is he doing?" Not confused, not panicked, genuinely asking, because what Bruce Lee was doing had no name in any fighting system that corner man had ever studied. It wasn't boxing, it wasn't wrestling, it wasn't kung fu in any traditional sense. It was something that borrowed from everything and was limited by nothing. This was Jeet Kune Do, the art Bruce Lee had spent 15 years creating, not from books, not from tradition, from truth. One question, asked relentlessly, every single day. What actually works against a fully resisting opponent? Who is trying to hurt you right now in real time? Most martial arts had never honestly answered that question, because most martial arts had never been forced to. They existed in controlled environments, with cooperative partners, with rules that protected their techniques from being genuinely tested. Bruce Lee tested everything, kept only what survived, threw away the rest, without sentiment, no matter how beautiful, no matter how ancient, no matter how many generations had passed it down. If it didn't work, it was gone. What remained was what was standing in that ring right now. No unnecessary weight, no decorative movement, no performance, just function. Pure, distilled, terrifying function. André steadied himself against the ropes, breathing harder now. The easy confidence completely gone, replaced by something Bruce Lee recognized immediately, something he had seen on many faces over the years. The moment a fighter realizes that the story they told themselves about this fight is wrong, and what happens next in that moment defines everything. There is a difference between a fighter who is winning and a fighter who has decided to finish. For the last several minutes, Bruce Lee had been winning, controlling, dismantling, educating, every exchange a quiet lesson, every movement a demonstration of the enormous gap between what André thought he was facing and what he was actually facing. But Bruce Lee hadn't been trying to finish. He had been studying, even here, even now, even in this. Every fighter Bruce Lee ever faced was information, every reaction, every adjustment, every micro-movement that revealed something true about how this particular body responded to pressure. But now, the study was complete. He had everything he needed. He knew exactly how André moved when he was confident. He knew exactly how André moved when he was rattled. He knew the 3 signals that came before the right hand. He knew the shoulder drop that preceded every takedown attempt. He knew the way the left foot planted a full half second before any serious weight transfer. He knew this man's body better than this man knew it himself. And now, Bruce Lee made a decision, quiet, internal, completely invisible. Nobody in that arena could see it happen, but every single person in that arena was about to feel it. He changed, not visibly, not physically. Something underneath the surface shifted. The stillness was still there, but it was a different stillness now. The stillness before a strike is not the same as the stillness of waiting. André felt it. He couldn't have named what he felt, but something ancient in his nervous system sent a signal, Something just changed. Be careful. He hesitated. For the first time since the opening bell, André the Giant hesitated, and hesitation against Bruce Lee was the most expensive mistake you could possibly make. Bruce Lee moved, not the controlled, measured movement of the last several minutes. Something that came from deeper, something that had been coiled and compressed through 15 years of obsessive daily work, and was now, finally, released. He crossed the distance between them in a way that witnesses would later struggle to describe. Not a run, not a lunge, something smoother than both, something that seemed to compress the space between 2 points in a way that ignored the normal relationship between distance and time. The first strike landed on André's lead shoulder, not hard, not meant to damage, meant to redirect, meant to open, like a key turning in a lock. André's body responded exactly as Bruce Lee knew it would. The shoulder rotated back, the chin came forward, the right side of the ribcage opened for exactly 4/10 of a second. 4/10 of a second. Most fighters wouldn't recognize that window existed. Most fighters who recognized it wouldn't be fast enough to use it. Bruce Lee didn't just use it. He had created it deliberately. Engineered that exact opening from the moment he identified the shoulder signal 3 minutes ago. The second strike, short, straight, fully committed. The full rotational force of his entire body delivered into one precise point on André's right ribcage. The sound was wrong. Everyone in the front rows heard it, not the dull thud of impact on muscle. Something sharper, something that reached inside the body rather than stopping at the surface. The ringside doctor sat up straight, put his bag on his lap. André's face changed completely, eyes wide, mouth opening slightly, his enormous frame beginning to respond to something it had never been asked to absorb before. But Bruce Lee wasn't finished. He reset in less than a second, found the new position that André's stagger had created, saw the opening that now existed, where no opening had existed before. The third strike was different, not harder necessarily, but placed with a specificity that turned force into something surgical, something final. It landed clean, left side of the jaw. The exact point Bruce Lee had identified from across the ring before the opening bell. The point he had been saving, the point that required everything else to be set up first. The world slowed down. 520 pounds began to fall. Not quickly. Large things never fall quickly. They fall the way buildings fall, with a terrible, unstoppable inevitability. A slow-motion collapse. That seems impossible, right up until the moment it becomes undeniable. André the Giant, the eighth wonder of the world, the man who had walked into this arena laughing, the man who had placed his hand on Bruce Lee's head and told his corner, "I don't even need 2 hands," went down. The canvas shook, the ring posts vibrated, the ropes swayed. 3,000 people who had been laughing 40 seconds ago were completely, utterly, silently still. The referee was counting, his voice the only sound in the entire arena. 1, 2, 3. Bruce Lee walked to the neutral corner, didn't celebrate, didn't raise his hands, didn't turn to the crowd. He stood quietly and watched André with the same focused attention he had watched him with since the opening bell, not with triumph, not with satisfaction, with something quieter than both. 4, 5, 6. André was moving, his massive hands pressing against the canvas, his body working against gravity, with everything it had left. 7, 8. He made it to one knee. The crowd found its breath again, not the roaring noise from before. Something different, something that sounded almost like collective disbelief, learning how to exhale. 9. He was up. Barely. Leaning on the ropes, eyes refocused, jaw set. The referee checked him. André answered correctly. The fight would continue. Bruce Lee turned from the neutral corner, walked back to the center of the ring, and what happened next was not about fighting anymore. What happened next, nobody in that arena had paid to see, and nobody who was there that night would ever forget it. André the Giant stood up, and the arena lost its mind. Not because anyone expected him to win anymore. That expectation had quietly died, somewhere between the second strike and the sound that followed it. They erupted because he stood up, because 520 pounds that had just been introduced to the canvas had found the will to get back vertical. There is something in the human spirit that responds to that, something ancient, something that recognizes, in the simple act of rising, a quality worth honoring, regardless of the scoreboard, regardless of everything else. The referee stepped back, signaled for the fight to continue. André looked across the ring at Bruce Lee, and something remarkable happened, something nobody had paid for, something no promoter had advertised, something that couldn't be planned, or rehearsed, or manufactured. André smiled, not the chest-shaking laugh from before the bell, not the arrogant, easy grin of a man who finds his opponent funny. Something completely different, small, quiet, almost invisible, unless you were looking directly at him. The smile of a man who has just been shown something he didn't know existed. Bruce Lee saw it immediately, and something in Bruce Lee shifted too. He had come into this ring with a job. He had done it, dismantled every weapon André possessed, exposed every gap, found every opening, taken the eighth wonder of the world down to the canvas. But that smile, that small, genuine, reluctant smile, told Bruce Lee something important, something that changed the entire nature of what was still happening in this ring. It told him that André was not defeated, not in the way that actually mattered. His body had gone down, but something underneath, something beneath the size and the power and the reputation was still standing, still present, still, remarkably, curious. Bruce Lee had faced many opponents over the years, fighters who broke when challenged, fighters who turned ugly when losing, fighters who made excuses before the fight was even finished. But a fighter who could absorb everything, Bruce Lee had delivered, and respond with genuine curiosity instead of bitterness. That was rare, genuinely rare. The referee signaled, the fight continued, but something had shifted in the ring, in the atmosphere, in the invisible agreement between the two men standing at its center. André came forward again, but differently, not with the blind aggression from before, not with the dismissive certainty from before. He came forward the way a student approaches something they are genuinely trying to understand, and Bruce Lee, who had been prepared to finish this completely, made a decision that surprised everyone watching, including himself. He pulled back, not retreating, not defensive. He simply gave the man room, space to move, space to try, space to reach for something better than what he had been doing. The next 3 minutes were unlike anything that had come before them. André threw combinations that were technically better than anything he had thrown all night. Not because he had suddenly improved, but because the desperation was gone. The panic was gone. The story that had been making him rigid and predictable and easy to read was gone. In its place, something more honest. A fighter simply fighting, without the weight of reputation, without the burden of being the eighth wonder of the world, just a man and his body trying to solve a problem that was genuinely worth solving. Bruce Lee moved around him, still controlling, still reading every movement before it happened, still operating, several seconds ahead of real time, but doing something else now, something subtle, something only the most experienced eyes in that arena would have noticed. He was giving André moments to be good, not gifting him openings, not pretending to be hit, nothing dishonest. But when André's technique was correct, when his footwork was right, when a combination had genuine merit, Bruce Lee acknowledged it, not with words, with movement, by making the defense slightly harder than it needed to be, letting the man feel the weight of his own improvement. This was teaching in the middle of a fight. This was Bruce Lee being exactly who he always was, in every room he ever walked into. Not just a fighter, a teacher. With 30 seconds left, Bruce Lee made his final move. Not a strike, not a takedown, nothing that would end up in any record book. He stepped inside André's guard, closer than any fighter had ever willingly stepped, into 520 pounds, and held. Not a tactical clinch, not buying time, something that in any other context would have made no sense at all. For 3 seconds, Bruce Lee held André the Giant and said something, quietly, directly into his ear. Something nobody else in that arena could hear. André went completely still. The bell rang. Both men stepped back, looked at each other, and André the Giant, the 8th wonder of the world, the man who had walked into this arena with one hand on Bruce Lee's head and laughter in his chest, did something that made 3,000 people hold their breath one final time. He nodded, slowly, deliberately, with absolute sincerity, the nod of a man who has just been given something he didn't know he needed. Bruce Lee nodded back. The crowd didn't know what had been said. They didn't know what had been exchanged in those 3 quiet seconds. But they felt it, every single one of them, the way you feel something true before you have the words for it. What Bruce Lee had whispered into the ear of the 8th wonder of the world would not become public for 11 years. When André finally told the story himself, in a quiet interview that almost nobody read, he revealed what Bruce Lee had said. 4 words. You are not finished. Not as a taunt, not as a challenge. As the most honest thing one fighter had ever said to another, in the middle of taking him apart, you are not finished. And now, 11 years later, the whole world finally knew. But what those 4 words actually meant, what they produced, in the years that followed that night, that is the part of this story that nobody has ever fully told until now. The final bell rang, and Hong Kong exhaled. Not the explosive release of a crowd, that has just watched a knockout. Something longer, something deeper. The kind of exhale that happens when people have been holding something they didn't even realize they were holding. The referee took both men to the center, raised Bruce Lee's hand. The crowd responded, but not the way crowds respond to a winner being announced. There was applause for Bruce Lee. Of course there was. What they had witnessed deserved every piece of it. But there was something else in that arena, something directed at the other man, at the 7'4", 520-pound man, standing with a swollen jaw and completely different eyes than the ones he had walked in with. André the Giant received something that night that he had never received before, genuine respect, not the fearful stay-out-of-his-way respect that his size had always generated, not the respect of men who simply didn't want to be next. Real respect, earned respect, the respect that flows toward a man who has been genuinely tested and shown, underneath all the reputation, something worth honoring. He had stood up, he had kept going, he had found something real in the middle of being completely dismantled, and he had held on to it. That meant something. To Bruce Lee, to the crowd, to everyone there that night. The 2 men stood side by side at the center of that ring for a moment that nobody photographed, nobody recorded, nobody had the presence of mind to document, because nobody had anticipated that this was the moment worth capturing. Bruce Lee looked at André. André looked back, and they shook hands, not the formal, obligatory handshake. That ends every professional fight. A real one, the kind where both hands grip and neither releases immediately, the kind that says something that words are simply not adequate for. 3,000 people, complete silence, 2 men. One moment, this was not what anyone had paid for. This was worth infinitely more. After that night, things changed, not immediately, not dramatically, but in the quiet, permanent way that real things change. André never spoke publicly about that night for over a decade, not because he was ashamed, not because he wanted to forget, because he was still processing it, still sitting with what had happened, still turning it over the way you turn over something valuable, trying to fully understand what you are actually holding. When he finally spoke in that quiet interview, he didn't talk about the strikes. He didn't talk about the canvas. He didn't talk about the moment 520 pounds met the floor. He talked about 4 words. You are not finished. He said those 4 words had changed the direction of his life, not because they softened the loss, not because they made the defeat easier to carry, but because they were true, and because the man who said them had just spent the previous several minutes proving beyond any possible doubt that he understood exactly what he was talking about. When Bruce Lee told you something, you listened, not because of his speed, not because of what he had just done to you, but because every word he said carried the weight of a man who had personally lived it. Every struggle he described, he had survived himself. Every principle he taught, he had tested himself. Every truth he offered had been paid for in full through years of quiet, unglamorous, relentless work. That is what made Bruce Lee different. Not the movies, not the legend, not the poster on the wall. The work, the notebooks at 2 a.m, the questions nobody else thought to ask, the willingness to lose and convert every single loss into something useful, the absolute refusal to accept anything as true until it had been tested against reality and survived. André said something else in that interview, something that has stayed with everyone who has ever read it. I walked into that ring thinking size was everything. I walked out understanding that size is just the beginning. Bruce Lee finished that conversation, but he also started a new one I am still having with myself, every single day. Every single day. Think about what that means. A man defined entirely by his physical presence, a man whose whole identity had been built around the idea that what he was enough. And one night in Hong Kong, 135 pounds had quietly, permanently expanded that picture, had shown him that what a person is just the raw material, that what a person becomes is a choice, made daily, made in the dark, when nobody is watching, when there is no crowd, no ring, no opponent, just you, and the question of whether you are willing to do the work. Bruce Lee asked that question every single day of his life, from a 13-year-old in a Chinatown rooftop to the man who stood under an enormous hand in a Hong Kong ring and felt nothing because he had already done everything required to make that moment completely inevitable. He died 2 years later, July 20th, 1973, 32 years old. In 32 years, he had built something that most people couldn't build in 3 lifetimes, not a career, not a reputation, not a legend, though all of those followed. He had built a truth, a living, tested, battle-proven truth about what human beings are capable of when they refuse to accept limitation as a permanent address. André attended Bruce Lee's funeral, stood at the back, quietly, didn't speak to anyone, didn't make himself known. He was just there, the way you are present at the passing of someone who gave you something you can never repay. He stood for the entire service, and when it was over, walked out into the afternoon light and stood still, the way Bruce Lee had stood still across that ring 2 years earlier. Not empty stillness, not absence, the stillness of someone who is fully present, fully aware, and quietly, completely, permanently changed. Somewhere tonight, that arena still stands. The ring is long gone, the crowd is gone, the cigarette smoke and the laughter and the hand on the head, all gone. But something remains, something that doesn't need a building or a ring or a crowd to survive. The truth demonstrated there. That night, between those 2 men, that size is just the beginning of a conversation, that the loudest thing in the room is rarely the most dangerous, that the most dangerous thing is the thing that has done the work, quietly, completely, without applause, without audience, without any guarantee that it would ever matter. Just the work, just the truth, just the refusal to be anything less than everything you are capable of being. Bruce Lee was 32 years old when he left this world. He is still here, in every fighter who asks why, instead of just repeating, in every person who stays when everyone else has gone home, in every human being who has ever stood in front of something much larger than themselves, and refused to take a single step back. The dragon never left. He just became something you carry into every room, into every ring, into every moment where the easy thing and the true thing are not the same thing. And in those moments, if you are very still and very honest and very present, you can feel him there. Be water, my friend. Be water. The end